Hi, I'm Kara.
And I'm Adam. Welcome back to Crunchy Cozy Games.
Today, we're talking about an awesome game that I am super excited about.
If you can't tell by our shirts, Kara and I are both big fans of Lord of the Rings. In fact, actually, one of our first dates was you came over to my apartment and we watched the entire trilogy in one day.
Not just the entire trilogy, specifically the extended editions, because that is the only way to watch it.
Well, right. I mean, the other things don't exist, so that goes without saying. Kara.
Of course.
So we have had a game on our bucket list that we acquired fairly recently, but it hasn't gotten played until now. So we played War of the Ring. So if you're not familiar with War of the Ring, this second edition was released originally in 2012, but obviously it's a second edition, so it came from a previous War of the Ring. Yes. So it's a little bit of an older game, especially for our collection. We do tend to play more modern games. But it is a high-ranked game on BoardGameGeek.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit in our, was it the Smash or Pass video?
No, it was our Board Game Blind Spots.
Board Game Blind Spots.
And I think if you go back to that video, when we recorded it, I said, I think this is going to be the next one that we probably pick up.
And it was. Yeah, you were absolutely right.
So if you're not familiar with the game, let me give you just kind of a brief overview. And I will say that the game is pretty dense. So I'm not going to go through all the rules, but I'll just give you a general idea of what the game is like. So this is kind of your classic war game. You've got one person that's controlling the free peoples of Middle-earth, and then you've got another person that's controlling Sauron and the forces of evil. They're called the Shadow. Each turn, players are going to roll dice of their unique faction. The free people start off with fewer dice. The shadow starts off with more dice. And they roll those dice, and those dice determines what actions they can take. So they can do things like they can muster their armies so they can bring in reinforcements, or they can move armies, or they can attack with armies. They can also use event cards that they're picking up every round to play those to kind of modify situations on the board. They might do things like special attacks, they might do things like pulling in more troops, and they also might modify combat. The free peoples, on the other hand, they've got some special actions that they can do, because a big part of what you're doing in the game is guiding the Fellowship to throw the ring, the One Ring, into Mount Doom.
Cast it into the fire!
Instantly winning the game, of course.
Yes.
And the way that they do that is they basically play one of their dice to move the Fellowship. When they do that, the Shadow player has dice that they've dedicated to the hunt that then they roll, and if it lands on a 6, then they're spotted, and the Fellowship can move, but it comes at the cost of corruption, which you're drawing from a bag. So it's this really unique kind of cat and mouse, push and pull. You've got to take a little bit of risks. And this being our first time playing through the game, we actually played it over a number of days.
We did. As we've discussed before, our time for playing big, heavy games is somewhat limited to, late nights.
Right.
And so we took advantage of our wonderful board game table and had it set up under the table for the last week or so.
Yeah. So let's dive right into it and talk about some of the things that we really liked about the game.
Yeah. I really liked that there were a lot of, even though it was a war game, there were a lot of familiar mechanisms in the drawing of cards and the rolling of dice that determines the actions. That's definitely something that we've seen in other games that we've played. And so it felt to me less like something like Risk, which I find really dry, and more like a game that we like to play, just kind of a crunchy Euro.
Well, and I think what you're saying about Risk specifically is very interesting, because in Risk, literally all you're doing is attacking. You're moving and attacking and moving and attacking. In War of the Ring, you've got a lot of other things that you're doing, because in Risk, every turn is you get reinforcements, you place them wherever you want, and then you take your giant army and you try to move them through as many nations as you can conquer. In this, you're not going to be able to do that.
No, absolutely not.
And that's kind of, I think, frustrating for some people when they play the game, because this is going to move at a slower pace.
Well, especially at the beginning. I felt like the first the first night that we played it, it was obviously we were learning, and so
right.
it was. We were using that app that guides you through the turns, and it was a little bit of a slog when we stopped using it, just looking up the rule every time.
Right.
And, just at the beginning of the game, everything's super spread out. You think about, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, you think about kind of the beginning of the story where none of the armies are consolidated. Everything is actually spread out.
Right.
And the forces of evil are gathering, kind of, but they're kind of on the fringes.
Well, and I'll say that's something I really enjoyed about the game as well, is that I played as the Shadow, the evil folks, and Carrie, you played as the Free Peoples. I really enjoyed the political track that there was.
Yeah.
Because you can't just move forces out of your own borders, and you can't just go and attack whatever you want. A nation has to first be at war. And to do that, they have to move down this political track through using dice actions or through the Fellowship reaching those places.
Right. There are also cards that can be played, specifically usually character ones,
right,
which are very thematic to the story. It might be one called Eomer, son of Theoden, or whoever he's the son of.
Oh, you're brave to start throwing out all the pronunciations of names.
Yep. So it might be an Eomer card that if you are able to play it because of the certain conditions that are met, then that would activate Rohan.
Right.
And then they can become at war.
Right.
So a nation has to be both activated and at war to be able to recruit forces and also move armies to interact.
Well, and that created a really interesting puzzle for me to solve, because I wanted to, the way that the Shadow player wins the game, they've got two win conditions. One is that they can corrupt the ring bearer, and the second is that they have to get 10 points in military victories. Each stronghold is 2 points, each city is 1 point, and so you're basically trying to take over all these different areas. And so early on in the game, the only faction that was at war with me was the elves, and so I really was just attacking them to keep the other nations from joining in.
Exactly, because as soon as you attack one, then they automatically are activated and move on the political track closer to being at war.
Right.
And as soon as they're activated, they can be at war and they can contribute to the fight.
Well, and I think that's such a cool mechanism for the story, because if you remember, the classic scene of the movies, they've got everybody around the table talking about what they're going to do and how they're going to get rid of the ring, and it's difficult to get everybody activated and ready to go to war, just like I imagine it is for a lot of that.
Absolutely. In the game that we played, thinking about that, I don't think that the dwarves were activated until like the second to last turn, and that was just because I was like, I have this extra dice, I can't do anything else, I'm gonna move them down the political track.
Well, and you never lost a single dwarf either. So
I didn't.
They just were basically ambivalent to the war around them.
Right, just totally, not important, not relevant at all to any of the situations.
Right. I will say, the map for this is huge. It is quite literally 2 game boards.
It's definitely in the category of table hog, but there isn't the extra burden of having a player board as well. So you have your big board and you have cards in your collection of minis, but they do fit, at least on our table, they fit kind of just alongside.
Right.
And you're not juggling a full-size player mat as well.
Well, and I really liked that big board because, I feel like you see this in all these old-timey movies where they have this big table laid out and they've got this stick that shoves the pieces across there. I really got that feeling, especially moving some of our armies across, that it felt like everybody standing around the table and being like, and now I moved this army into Lorien.
Absolutely.
So I absolutely loved that. Now let's talk about characters.
Sure.
So my armies only had 3 named characters that I could control. One was Saruman, who couldn't move anywhere.
Yeah, he just was trapped in Orthanc.
Which thematically makes sense.
It absolutely
does.
It's
very frustrating. Then I had the Witch King, and a character that never made an appearance because we just never quite got there, and that was the Mouth of Sauron.
Oh, yeah.
Each of those had kind of special abilities, special traits, and then, of course, all my leaders were Nazgul.
Yes.
And that was very cool because I could just move them around the board.
Yeah, they were just zipping around. You were just flying them around. It was super annoying.
They're yucky. But you, on the other hand, you had a ton of characters.
Yeah, I mean, the Free Peoples starts out with, the armies are scattered and not coherent at all, and you're really focusing on the Fellowship at the very beginning. And so the Fellowship is represented by the Ring Bearer's figure, but the Fellowship is comprised of all of the characters that you think of.
Right.
And there is a designated guide that starts as Gandalf. You can switch it to Strider, you can switch it to other people as people peel off of the Fellowship.
Right.
And so that is something, as I moved and you were drawing those hunt tiles and doing corruption damage, there were some of those leaders that had the option to take damage and be eliminated and reduce the hunt damage, reduce the corruption, or had the ability to just kind of deflect that damage, but again, get moved off of the Fellowship.
Right.
And so, pretty early on, I had separated out Boromir, Gimli, and Legolas. And then I got them all trapped in Lorien when it was getting smashed. It was not a good move on my part.
Well, and I think that's a good segue into the battle system. So let's talk a little bit about that. Whenever you do a field battle, it's a pretty simple process. The attacker rolls the dice equal to the number of figures that they have in that
army unit figures specifically.
Yeah, army unit figures, so leaders don't count, characters don't count. But you roll up to 5 dice for that. Hits happen on a 5 or a 6. You count up the number of hits. The defender does the exact same thing, counts up their number of hits, and then each person pulls their figures. You also have combat cards that kind of augment the strength of that. Some can modify your dice rolls. And then your leaders and characters, they have leadership ratings, and that basically allows you to roll any dice again that you choose. So if you've got 2 leaders there, you can re-roll 2 dice.
Right, try to give you another chance to get a hit.
Right. So what did you think of the battle system?
I thought the battles were pretty straightforward, honestly. I think the hardest thing, of course, was trying to figure out, if I wanted to play a combat card, like you sacrifice the event card for the combat section, because each card was divided into 2 sections.
Which I really like.
So like one thing that you can play that's like a cool effect, or something that's very story driven and thematic, or something that gives you extra army units, or at least for me, I was able to recruit more army units than you normally would in a regular action.
Yeah.
But do you sacrifice that ability for the ability to block combat, or increase your dice rolls by 1, or whatever the ability happens to be? That's a decision to make.
And what I really love about that is how much that decision changes as you play the game. Like, you really do get the sense that, like, time is running out. I have to make a big play and I have to do it now.
Absolutely.
I will say that I think the battle system works really well. It is very cool. It doesn't feel like Risk, where it's just like you're always pulling pieces. Instead, I mean, it is a big thing that you're like, okay, I've got the numbers advantage here, but you could just get luckier in rolls and roll a bunch of 5s and 6s, and I may not.
So speaking of rolling 5s and 6s, how did you feel about the siege system? Because like you said, the Shadow Army is really focused on one of your main goals is getting that military victory, which means you have to take over strongholds, you have to take over cities. And in those strongholds, I, as the Free People, had the option to retreat into a siege.
Right.
Which canceled the battle for the first round. And then after that, you had to hit on a 6.
Right. Yeah, it's brutal. Because even just that slight change of you can hit on a 5 or 6, and I could only hit on a 6, that changed the tide of our battles. A lot of the times I was going in with these massive armies and feeling like, well, there's no way that you could win. And then just time after time, it was, I mean, every battle that we went, I was just losing forces and you were losing nothing because I wasn't rolling a 6.
Yeah. Which also is important, because whenever the Free People army units die, they're gone. They're eliminated from the game. Yeah. Whereas yours go back into the pool and can be recruited again.
Right.
But, I was able to hold Lorien with the 5 army unit maximum that you can put into the siege against your multiple waves of...
Well, and the other critical thing about a siege that I think is just absolutely brilliant, I mean, I was definitely cursing it in the middle of the siege, is that every every attack is basically its own action. So you have to use a dice to attack. And normally when you do a field battle, you can just fill that out until it's over. In a siege, every time you attack, if you want to continue the attack, you have to downgrade one of your elite units into a regular. So it's almost like you're losing forces every turn that you attack. And so you build your numbers up as much, but then you're still battling against the fact that you hit on one less number.
Right.
So your numbers start to deplete very quickly.
And, I mean, we talked about those combat cards. Some of those defense cards that I had were absolutely devastating.
Oh, they were brutal. So I really enjoyed that, and I think thematically that just makes sense because, you know, I'm thinking about the movies and Helm's Deep, and they've got the numbers and everybody's lined up and it looks like they're going to fail, and then they just pull it up. They just pull it off.
They do.
It's very cinematic, and I can't believe they figured out a way to do that in the board game.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I just really liked was the system for hunting the Fellowship.
Sure.
Because as I mentioned at the start, how the game works is you have dice that you're going to roll at the start of the round, and that determines what you can do. Before the shadow player rolls their dice, they can allocate a number of them into the hunt. So the more dice that they put into the hunt, the higher likelihood they're going to have to catch the Fellowship and add corruption.
Right, because each of those dice is a die that you're rolling to determine if you see them.
Right. So yeah, anything else that you want to say as far as what you liked about the game?
I mean, I think that I think that's probably good.
Cool.
I think that overall it was a really satisfying game. I mean, I lost, unfortunately.
Yeah, so our game was really close.
It was so close, but that's what I was going to say. I think that the game didn't feel hopeless. It felt like it was just kind of a race to the finish line, and in that last round it really could have been either of us that took that victory. It all came down to the dice rolls and the draw from the bag.
Yeah, I had 9 combat points going into the last couple of turns of the game, so I was 1 away from victory. I was currently sieging Minas Tirith, but it was one of those that I was waiting on reinforcements to help me out with that battle.
And I was 2 steps on the Mordor track, but I had 10 corruption. And so, you know, I was really hoping for some of those special tiles that I was able to put in the bag with events that would heal me. But I just got unlucky. Yeah.
And I was telling Kara when I won that way, I was like, it doesn't feel as good as the military victory did, but I still feel good about it. Because again, thematically it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about things we didn't like as much.
Sure. You want to start with this one?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest thing for me is you really got to know your Middle Earth. I feel like I do, but there was a lot of times where I would get a card that would say, hey, you can place a force here, here, and here, and I would have to kind of scour the map looking for them. Now, normally that's not a problem, but when you have your armies and your forces on those territories...
It obscures the names.
It's hard to see, and unless you know where you're looking for, it's going to take you even longer because the map's huge.
Yeah, definitely some prior knowledge of Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth lore and the map is definitely a bonus for playing this game.
For sure.
I think one thing that I didn't love was that I did not read the rulebook super closely because we were playing, we learned with the assistance of the app, and then you kind of dug in a little more into some of the other things. But at the beginning, I had a hard time determining which mini belonged to which nation.
Right. That's, I think, especially for the free peoples, it's really tough.
It is. And
because you've got, you know, guy on horse, or guy with shield, or guy with spear.
Guy on horse with banner, guy on horse with bow, guy on horse with arm up in the air. Like, which one is which? I don't know. It could
see, mine were cool because it was like, I've got elephants and guys with bows and orcs and
cave trolls.
Giant orcs. Yeah.
So all of my guys kind of look the same.
Right.
I also think, though, that the symbols for the nations were similarly difficult to tell.
Yes.
They were all shades of brown or kind of going for metallic. So it was probably like bronze, silver, gold, whatever. One of them had a tree, one of them had a horse, but the icons are so small.
They're so small
that it's just really hard to see. Like I think the size of the camera lens on an iPhone is like how big those tokens are, and across the table, how do you tell what color that is?
Right. I totally agree with that. I mean, there was a lot of times where I was like, okay, which one is this? Did I move the right one? I mean, the Isengard and the Easterlings. I'm not familiar with those sigils, so that was a little harder to figure out.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of those things that as you memorize those and playing the game, not going to be a problem later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that, as you play something like this, there's a little bit of suspension of love for the for the source material.
You could not get over that I killed Gandalf so early in the game.
You just kind of have to, like, you can appreciate the content and you can appreciate the theme and the characters and all of the things that are going on, but you just have to get over that it's not going to turn out like the actual story. Like, you're creating your own story in this world. Like
in our version, I enslaved all the people of Middle Earth.
Sure did. But yeah, I think that's something that right at the beginning when you're starting it out and you're like, I'm going to play it just like the story, and then it just goes totally out the window.
Yeah.
Like 2 turns in, and you're just like, okay, well, here we go.
Right. Yeah, and I really enjoyed that too, because you do kind of create some of the things that happen in the books and the moments that are in the movies, especially when you get the right card at the right time, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. Yeah. And I kind of love that what if. Like, what if Boromir was the one to return to Gondor? Or what if, all 4 hobbits made it to Mount Doom? It's all very interesting to me.
Yeah, it sure is.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what we liked, what we didn't like. Overall, would you recommend this game?
Oh, I would absolutely recommend this game. I don't think it's for everybody.
For sure. Yeah, I'm with you. I loved it. I think it's terrific. I would recommend it to anybody that's into this type of board game. I would also say this is a 2-player game. You can play it with 4.
Yeah,
it has instructions for it.
But really, what you're doing is you're playing as a team for one of the 2 teams.
Right. Exactly. And that's fine. You can do that. And, you could probably figure it out that, like, one person's controlling this faction or these factions.
Right.
To each their own in that aspect of it. But to me, this is a 2-player game, and it needs to be 2 players that love the source material that also really enjoy playing games with each other.
Yeah.
Because as we mentioned, I mean, overall game time on this would clock in for us about 6 hours.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we spent that over multiple days.
Yes.
But not everybody has that kind of time, and not everybody has the kind of like table that we do to leave it set up and not have to worry about it.
Sure. Like if you have to play it in one sitting because you don't have that ability to keep it set up, like you're gonna need a solid afternoon into evening to get it done.
Right. Now, I will say it plays a lot faster than I think most war games do. Like, you compare this to a Twilight Imperium or even Risk, this is going to play a lot faster, especially as you're familiar with the rules. I would also say that that's a thing I really like about it, is it doesn't overstay its welcome.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't run out of cards, but we were getting down to it, and it was like, oh, shoot, we're in the end game now.
Yeah, well, and it, like I said earlier, it started kind of slow, but as we were getting towards those last couple of turns, we were both really familiar with the action dice at that point. The back and forth was really, really fast.
Right.
And it was just kind of a race at the end, and it felt fast.
Yeah, it felt fast. It felt intense. It was really like, okay, I just need this, then I'll get here. I think it's really cool. I think it's probably best if you are a couple that loves to play board games like we are, and you love J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a great game for you.
Yeah.
And again, you have to have that caveat of, if you're a puzzly gamer, it's probably ain't going to be for you.
Yeah. But if you like the light games, this is
a heavy one.
It is heavy.
It's heavy, it's strategic, and it can also feel really crushing when you make that wrong decision and everything falls apart.
Well, you also have to know that you're going to be attacking each other. So like a fun
Right.
couples game, but like with the caveat that you can't be too worried about the fact that I'm attacking your armies.
Right. And
don't
mercilessly
get offended.
killing them.
Don't take it personally.
Yeah. So I think this from both of us, it gets a high recommendation.
Absolutely.
We absolutely loved it, but we want to hear from you. Have you played War of the Ring? And if you have, what did you think of it? Did us talking about it make you think maybe I should look up a copy of this game?
Yeah, is this a yes or no from you?
We're going to try to do a little bit more of these, diving deeper into some of the games that we really like and sharing our thoughts about them. So if you've enjoyed this content, be sure to give us a like and subscribe. And if you can, leave a comment in there to let us know what you think. That'll help us get more visible for more people.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I'm Adam.
And I'm Karen. Thanks for stopping by.
Bye.